Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. This show is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. Our guest today is Vivek Modi, and he comes from a strong consulting background, is currently chief of staff, and also works with advising startups. So we will hear all about that. But Vivek, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily. Looking forward.
Beautiful. And to start us out with, can you just tell us a little bit about your journey to chief of staff, a quick kind of background on you?
Sure, happy to share. So I have had a very, let's say, diverse work experiences and roles. I say that in my first life, I was an engineer. Brown person from India. What do you expect, right? Well, confirming all the stereotypes, but no, really enjoyed being an engineer. That's what I studied in my bachelor's, and then worked in Africa for 3.5 years as an engineer. And I was reporting to the CFO. So that was the point where I got in on the business side of engineering and started getting a bit more insights on business related areas. And that interested me way more than just engineering, just the spectrum of it, the responsibility that was there, along with the role and so on. So I studied business, did my MBA from TU Munich, and then worked in consulting for a few years, Ernst & Young and Roland Berger, and then ended up here as a chief of staff. Consulting was, so what I do right now has a lot in common with what I did as a consultant as well. And also some similarities to what I did as a project manager, engineering project manager, helping the CFO implementing projects. So all those life stations help a lot in what I do right now. And it's also becoming one of the classy, or let's say common exits right now in Europe after consulting. Chief of staff is a very broad spectrum of responsibilities under that title. So we'll have to get into what exactly this path leads and what responsibilities do I have as a chief of staff. But it was, as I said, rather a classic exit after working into consulting. Happy to dive deeper into one or the other stations or answer any questions
Yes,
that
no,
you may
thank you
have.
for that background. It sounds like you were globetrotting too. So Africa to Germany, you've been all over.
Yeah, in consulting, I was about 8 months in the UK as well.
Oh, okay.
So, yes,
Wow.
indeed.
Very cool. And you mentioned kind of a common exit. So in Europe, did you say? So chief of staff in
Mhm.
Europe, common exit would be to consulting or vice versa?
Um, I think getting into consulting from chief of staff role is maybe not that common, but the other way around, from consulting to chief of staff is more of a common exit that or transition that I have seen. The reason behind that is consulting, they do not look for a particular experience in the initial, so in freshers or low level, let's say in junior consultant analyst level roles.
Right.
They have their very standard processes of recruitment. You go through case studies, but they are not particularly looking for a background. If you in Europe transitions from one role to another role or drastic career transitions are rather less common than in the States. So people still look into patterns of, let's say, consulting internships or some sort of in-house consulting role. So in that sense, chief of staff role might help you to establish your interests on type of topics to work on
Oh, okay.
into consulting. But I haven't seen that many transitions from COS to consulting role. The other way around is, rather more common.
And just for context, when you were at Ernst & Young, were you an analyst level at that point, or where did you come in?
I came in as a consultant level, so it's one level because I already had some experience before
Okay.
my MBA, so that's one level above analyst. Um, so yeah, kind of a intermediate consultant.
Okay. And it's interesting you mentioned it's a common exit because I do see even in the US, there's a lot of overlap between consulting and chief of staffing, and people going in and out of those different roles. So, just from your perspective, I'm very curious. Do you see a lot of overlap and similarities between the two roles, or is it like, Emily, these things are night and day difference, or what's your take on that?
There are absolutely a lot of similarities, but at the same time, there are also decent differences. Let's talk about similarities first. So I think the project-based work. So as a chief of staff, you are expected to, let's say, be in a temporarily operative
Mhm.
role where there is a gap within the organization. So you might go in, you might look at the process or design a new process, structure a new process, do it for a while till it gets on the automation mode, and then you hand it over to other colleagues when the resources are there. So this is pretty much a consulting kind of role where often big companies who can afford consultants would hire a team of people to take care of topics that are, let's say, not directly taken care by one or the other functional departments. Um, or when you have chief of staff or a strategy department in house, you deploy those people or project management department into roles that are not assigned to or are new
Mm.
to
Yeah.
the organization. That's one part. Second part, where there is a huge overlap, is into strategic planning. And that starts from long-term planning about strategy to also annual planning till OKRs, and then tracking the whole project management stuff. There as well, there's a huge overlap. I think one McKinsey partner said once that you can't improve what you can't track.
Mm.
So this tracking KPI, OKR based mentalities is heavily consulting driven, or uh, in my biased perspective as an ex-consultant, originated from consulting world. Um, so that mindset and those tools and skills that one learns into consulting come
Mm.
very handy in chief of staff role.
Mm.
Stakeholder management, influencing without authority. These are also very uh, because often chief of staffs are individual contributors
Mhm.
and dealing with leaders. So these are as well. These are also quite. These are also tasks where you, as a consultant, are trained on. These were similarities. Now, before we go into what changed or what are the differences, firstly, we'll give you. I have. It was a bit of a monologue, so if you have any questions or any remarks before we go into differences.
No, that was great. I think the last thing you touched on, everyone I speak with is always interested in how do I influence without direct authority? Because that is a very common place for a chief of staff to be in. And it's right to call out that consultants are in the same position oftentimes as well. So how did you mentioned like we're trained to do that. How did you go about, what was your approach to um, interacting with C-suite colleagues, with senior executives and having to influence decisions and get people rallied around something without having that direct, I am your boss, therefore I can tell you what
Hmm.
to do.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, very good question, Emily. Um, so here as well, linking it with differences and similarities between chief of staff and consultant role. Um, Often consultants are seen as someone who is behind your jobs or who is coming in as an external,
Yeah.
trying to look into your KPIs and tell you what you are not doing right. Right. So that's a typical perspective, how people look at consultants. So being in house already, that helps a lot. So
Mm.
that is kind of a given plus within chief of staff role that you are not looked, you are working with those colleagues every day. So there is a long term bonding with those colleagues
Yeah.
compared to when you're a consultant and just coming as an external player. So that helps. I think before you go and influence people, it's important to build trust. Um, and trust, one, in terms of relationships, second, in terms of your capabilities. So I think what helps a lot, or what helped me a lot, is in the initial phase, not try to, let's say, not try to achieve this influence as my one of the first KPIs, but rather from build trust and at both the levels, with your principal as well as with the key stakeholders that the principal is
Mhm.
working with. Helped a lot. And in direction to build trust, I think one is your attitude and approach. So instead of phrasing it in a way that, hey, I'm looking at your KPIs and I'm responsible for OKRs, and I'm measuring what you do. The attitude or phrasing should be, we are in the same team, and I'm helping you optimize what we are doing for the company. And also phrasing it in a way and having genuinely believing it, I think makes a huge difference. Um, so instead of looking at a process and saying, yeah, this doesn't work, being there and optimizing this process yourself so that everyone benefits. This framing and helps a lot. I think second that helps is how quickly you can, let's say, deliver some quick results, low hanging fruits. So first few weeks and months are extremely critical. I'm as a consultant, I'm a fan of believing that every day is your first day. So you still get to perform and be, but especially when you're in a new setup, people don't know what quality they can expect from you. Being extra diligent in first few projects that you do with people is quite helpful, and then that trust comes along with working together. Um, that was one part. I think second part is also making it clear what comes from you and what comes from your principal.
Mm.
So, because as a chief of staff, you are also a bit of in a privileged position to, let's say, convey the message of the CEO or your principal to the organization. You are the messenger, and they're making a clear separation between what your recommendations are, or what you actually want to work with or implement in the company, and what your principal wants to do, and letting like people seeing you doing this repeatedly and knowing, yeah, you do make a difference, and you're not leveraging, let's say, the spotlight that is there, also makes a difference. Um, I can go also a bit more tactical on what I did, let's say, to practically establish the trust and a good working setup with all my stakeholders. But yeah, we'll take a pause here first.
Yes. No, I definitely wanna get into that, but, maybe you'll answer this, you were gonna answer this in the next thing you said, but I often hear from chiefs of staff, "Emily, I don't wanna keep using my principal's name," meaning like I'm kind of hiding behind that because I want to stand on my own 2 feet. And I actually encourage people
Hmm.
like, you can
Hmm.
kind of name drop your principal in certain select points, but you don't want to make that a habit because you want to say like, you are coming at this. People know who you are. People know what you stand for, and you have to prove that you're capable on your own and that you
Hmm.
bring things to the table on your own. And yes, you do have this very special, unique relationship with the principal, but it's not just I'm a
Hmm.
microphone for my principal. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, and maybe that's where you were going as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, establishing trust within your own capabilities, right? And that happens when you take ownership of projects completely on your own, and phrase it as your own ideas, and really bring input that is, let's say, not just driven or given by your principal. It often sometimes means even challenging your principal, and standing presenting perspectives of your stakeholders, VPs, heads off, to the principal, that maybe they have difficulties in getting it through or something. So having your own opinion and own perspective on take on things, and
Mm,
standing by it, really going deep into topics, and not just doing administrative project management of transferring message, but really going into the core of different topics. and building opinion on your own, and then standing by the opinion with the principal as well as with the stakeholders. That helps a lot. And yeah, uh, I think I'd strongly recommend any chief of staff colleague who is yeah new in the role to
Yeah.
take a stand on your own positions.
Yeah, and I remember one time when I was chief of staff, it was, kind of late in my tenure, so people kinda knew what chief of staff was and what I was about and, that I was my own person, but we were in this leadership meeting, and we were discussing this one topic, and I, like, just disagreed with my principal, like, I wholeheartedly just, like, disagreed with the CEO, and I voiced my opinion, and everyone was going back and forth, and the team was kind of split on which direction to go, and, then, like, a day or 2 later, the CEO made a decision, and it was to go in a different direction than I was advocating for. But then it
Mm.
became my job to execute to that plan as best
Hmm.
as we possibly could. And I think in a lot of ways, it almost built up respect for me in the role of chief of staff because people saw me disagree and voice my opinion. But then once the decision was made, I was rallying the troops around this. How can we best execute that? So I like that you brought that up because there is this kind of dynamic between you want to have your own voice and have your own opinion,
Mm.
but you also like you make stuff happen when it's time for the rubber to meet the road.
Absolutely. I think this is true for almost every leadership role that is there in the company. So take any topic, right? There is always a difference of opinion, and that's very healthy for the company. That we are looking at one topic from all different perspectives possible, all different expertise involved. But once the decision is clear, the guideline is clear, then we all agree to that, and we are just trying to implement it in the best way possible. We make that decision our own. We leave that, and I think as much this is like equally true for all the VPs, all strategic
Yes.
slash leadership roles, and especially for chief of staff role as well. Um, would yeah, completely agree on that side. So it's a very healthy balance between, let's say, during brainstorming phase and having your own ideas, and then accepting the final decisions and then driving it really through.
Yes, and I thank you for saying it's a healthy it's not an antagonistic that wasn't an antagonistic discussion, but I like that you just
Mm.
to touch on it, like, this is healthy discussions, it's, like, where good ideas come from because we challenge each other and iron sharpens iron and that whole thing. So, any other practical tips on how to build trust? Because people love this stuff like, "Okay, I know I'm supposed to build trust, and trust is the foundation," and all those quotes and nice things, which are true, but, like, how do you actually do that?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, so let's talk about principles and about key stakeholders. So other than the principals, VPs or heads, whomsoever you're working with, um, I think with principle, um, again coming back to identifying low hanging fruits in first few in the initial time of your new role. And second is also constant and open feedback. So what we used to, and this again comes from consulting best practices, is we used to do weekly feedback sessions in the beginning of the projects, and then once you understand the working style, expectations of each other better, then you can reduce the frequency. We all have one-on-one setup in a lot of startups and nowadays in many companies, but often it's the frequency is like the CEO has a lot of stuff to do, so the frequency is often 6 weeks and so on, and that's fine. That's for a normal setup, it's okay. You also have to manage the time invested in just feedback. But in the beginning, it's very important that high frequency of communication and feedback is there. And similarly, I also so I do not have direct, let's say, functional topics that I'm working on with my key stakeholders, the VPs, but I nevertheless have set up a 30 minutes meeting where we talk about things. So it's with feedback, but at the same time, what they need from CEOs, what they need from other departments, and so on. So in those meetings, basically, I'm trying to address their needs, and trying to help them in reaching those goals. That might mean taking follow up from the CEO. That might mean coordinating more or other departments towards one project that has been there in pipeline for a while. And there, when they see, that you are offering a lot of value, and you're genuinely interested in, bringing things
Yes.
forward, then the attitude changes. Then when you also push things forward with that person, it is considered, it's looked at from a very different perspective. Rather help than, again, someone just telling you what to do. So finding areas where you can contribute quickly, low hanging fruits, in making lives of other people better.
Yes.
That's I would say the key, and really in first few months, keeping an eye on topics that where you can add value, um, that helps building trust.
Well, I want to highlight a few things you said because you've said some great things. First of all, if you can make someone's life easier, that goes a long way, right? When you're first meeting
Yeah.
someone, it's like, oh, like the first thing you do is you make my world better. Okay, I'll certainly interact with you more. And I think you've mentioned a couple times, but like genuinely wanting to help. Like I'm not here to
Yeah.
point fingers or say gotcha. My job is to make you successful and make your
Hmm.
process even better than it already is. So I think when that authenticity comes across and you're like, "Look, my job is to make you look really good." That
Yeah.
also has a different tone to it. I love your quote on every day is my first day. And I
Hmm.
also like the framing of when you build trust, you're building trust in terms of the relationships and also your capabilities. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a nice framework to go all the way back to what is not similar between chief of staff and consulting. Maybe we can touch on that. And like the
Hmm.
frame I'll have for this first question would be, where do you come down on like time and effort spent on strategic activities, like long-term strategic activities and decisions versus like tactical and practical, like hands-on keyboard type of work?
Hmm. Hmm. Just to get clarity on the second question, you mean percentage wise, right? How much time is spent, or
How much time is spent, and then kind of like as a consultant, where were you? What was the
Mhm.
percentage breakdown then as chief
Yeah,
of staff? Where do you see
yeah,
a difference, if any?
yeah. So consulting again is a huge industry. So I have worked at two consulting companies, and in different types of consulting roles. So depending on that, operation, how much operational tasks you do changes. Like Big Four, EY, Ernst and Young, KPMG, and so on. They are decent. So their strength is more on operational side.
Mm.
But strategy consulting segments, McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Roland Berger, Oliver Wyman, and so on, they are purely at analytical slash strategy level. So let's talk about that segment, as that was my last station. Um, it's 100% strategic work as a consultant. There is barely anything operational. There's operational within your team, organizing stuff and running the strategy project. But at the end, your core task is 100% strategy, analytical, conceptual, and that is also like that's the core of strategy consulting business, right? So that's your bread and butter, and that's what you do the whole day, day in, day out. um, and the difference between from consulting to chief of staff, and that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to transition to this role, is because here you do have a bit more operational responsibilities, and in some case even 360-degree responsibility. So you do not just analyze and see what can be optimized. Of course you do that, but then you make sure that that happens, that this optimization, this savings potential, this growth potential that you have theoretically on paper analyzed is there, and that's fascinating. It can also be a bit, let's say, sometimes bit time consuming and tedious, because at the end, then of course implementation is a longer phase than just
Yes.
doing strategy. So it requires a bit more patience to till you get the results and so on. But that's a big difference compared to consulting and
Mhm.
chief of staff. And if we talk about percentage, as I said, strategy consulting 100% strategy, chief of staff, this might vary compared to for every individual, depending on, again, and on what spectrum of chief of staff you are. After a strategy consulting exit, I would say 60% is still strategy work and 40% is implementation.
Okay. All right. That's a pretty
Um,
healthy split. I've heard people go, "Oh, I'm like 99% in tactical and practical and 1%." Sometimes I think about strategy. I'm like, "Ooh, okay. That's skewed quite a lot in one direction."
Yeah, as I said, it depends a lot on what the organization needs and how they have conceptualized
Sure.
the role. For me, it was important that I remain at like strategy has to play a decent role in my daily work. I enjoy doing that work. It's also my strength. So I wanted that very clearly, and it's also maybe a bit of a special situation here. I'm a chief of staff for two CEOs, so I have two
Mm.
principals, which is not that common. You are like shadowing one person, so you often are you often have, let's say, just one principal, and that kind of makes my role a bit different, and that's why there's a bit more strategic aspect. I'm also in-house consultant slash in-house strategy head of strategy. So I help CEO making the 5-year plan, and
Mhm.
that is, as a consultant, you would employ a team of 4 people working for 3 months, just doing a hell lot of analysis. So doing that in-house also consumes a lot of time and energy resource from my side, and then there is less left for tactical operational tasks. And that is why the split is like that. But it again depends on what in what cycle we are. Like we just did this year 5 years planning. We would not do
Mhm.
next year the 5 years planning. So next year some strategy work might be the share might vary a bit. But that's at least 50%. I want it to be still analytical. So it's also on you. You have to drive it, because there is never lack of things to do.
Oh, no.
And uh, yeah, you have to communicate it with your principal clearly. You have to see where you can add value.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it is the case that strategy work is not needed and things just needs to be done. So then, yeah, you gotta just be in that position and then do what's needed.
Yes, for sure. So you do have a pretty rare setup,
Hmm.
supporting 2 CEOs. I've had chiefs of staff support, um, multiple C-suite members, but not 2 CEOs. So maybe talk a little bit more about kind of the scope and how your role of chief of staff is set up.
So basically, the company, it's a bootstrap company. It evolved to quite a classic startup story in a way. Two young guys founding something after university, and the company evolved. And uh, they did for a long time a lot of things together. So they founded the company together. Thus, the titles are also both CEOs. There is no COO or CFO, even though departments are divided.
Mhm.
So titles are slightly misleading, I would say. They're not updated with the growth of the organization and time. But yes, so one person is more in direction of COO and CFO combined, and the other person, the principal I have, is more in the direction of Chief Product Officer and Chief Marketing Officer combined. Um, and that's the setup. And they have been growing at double-digit rate every year. So things have been working well for the company. And then they decided to be a bit more professional. So first they hired the level of heads of and VPs. So people with a ton of experience in the industry, in their
Mhm.
individual functions. And then things started becoming a bit more chaotic because the organization grew just naturally. Founders had not worked before in one or the other organization so that they could implement processes and systems, and suddenly we are boom, double or triple the size.
Yep.
So managing those people, working with people who are way more experienced and experts in their field, things started becoming difficult, and there they identified that they could take some help because they strengthen mostly functional departments, but not their own selves as CEOs or their own teams,
Ah,
right?
yes.
So that's where they identified the need that we need to strengthen the core leadership team. And then often every company in their stage reaches this critical point where founders realize that they are the bottleneck in terms of resources, and they need to get more things done. And sometimes you hire consultants, sometimes you hire a third a COO or someone who can join in the C-suite and help. Sometimes you hire chief of staff, and in our case, they decided for chief of staff, and that's how I joined.
Do you happen to know how they heard about chief of staff? Like why they wanted a chief of staff?
Uh, yes, so in Germany, there are roles also. So we used to have a role called Referenten for die Geschäftsführung, and that means kind of an assistant or founder's associate.
Mhm.
Literal translation would be founder's associate. So somewhere such kind of role did exist in German ecosystem. Also in politics, this role is quite common, but recently it has been very popular in startup world as well. And if I remember correctly, one of the CEOs just researched what role makes more sense. So they didn't want someone who would just uh, go in the meetings and take notes and do project
Yeah.
management. They wanted some more strategic input, and who can get into topics a bit more deeper and help the organization as a whole and be a there they identified that the chief of staff title um, works well. I think initially they had founders associate, or in German as the German title for it, the referent for Referentin for Geschäftsführung, and that didn't work out that well. So the people that they were getting, or the last person who was here, that setup didn't deliver much, and then they learned from the experience, and then upgraded the title to chief of staff.
Yes, and it's funny, I work with founders and management teams at all these different phases of the company that you're talking about. So startup to, oh, we're more than like 5 to 10 people, so we can't just stand up, over the cubicle and kind of talk about something. We're beyond that. And then other inflection points that come further down the line with, 50 people, 100 people doing,
Hmm.
3 times
Hmm.
as much revenue. And I love how you described it, which is many founders and CEOs will build up and develop their teams and functional areas, but they kind of miss doing that for themselves and their leadership. And when they come to that critical juncture, that is where you would bring in a chief of staff. So I think that's
Hmm.
a nice way to describe that. But yes, any advice you would give to someone going from consulting to being a chief of staff? So following the same path you did, is there something where, oh my gosh, if I would have known this at the beginning, life would have been so much easier?
Um, I'd say clarifying the responsibilities and understanding your role during the interview process is very critical. Um, Depending on which size of company you join. So now, yeah, also in big companies, the role is becoming very popular. So, like chief of staff role, history in White House, and then all across the world in politics, the role became a bit more popular. And then in startup world slash tech ecosystem, but now in Germany, we also have in corporates. So Siemens, one of the largest German company, has a chief of staff
Mm,
role. So depending on how mature the company is, I think if you are going for mature companies, I think it's pretty fine. But if you're going for, let's say, startups or smaller companies, then really understanding what the founder needs from the role, because depending on company, you could be doing complete different things,
It varies so much. Yeah.
polar apart from one another, each other, and thus really getting this clarity during the interview process, and then questioning yourself whether this is something really that you wanna do, and you wanna add value. Asking yourself whether what you want to do in next 5 years, whether this step that you're taking would contribute to your goal or not. That's I think the core thing, that I'd say, because during as I was interviewing, I have had a lot of experiences, funny experiences, where people just put titles like chief of staff. I don't know, somewhere they found it sounds sexy, let's use it. Sounds better than founders associate. Maybe you attract also. Sometimes people just put titles to attract better
Yeah.
talent, which is not a bad strategy, but then the responsibilities and intellectual challenges, and yeah, what the role, the learnings, what the role has to offer other than monetary compensation to the person, also needs to match with the title. And so I think there I'd encourage everyone to do a decent due diligence. That's one thing. I think second is, as I said, chief of staff does mean you are the hot fix guy, right?
Yes.
Something doesn't work, you go and fix it. You are that plumber, you are that electrician. So you know so this people have to, like, you have to make sure for yourself that this is something you would enjoy doing, because compared to just analyzing or reading theory on how to, let's say, finding the best optimal way or best tool to in theory to fix a pipe, and then doing it yourself, are two different skills.
Yeah. I've
So
never heard that term before, but I love it. Like, a chief of staff in the startup phase is absolutely an executive hot fixer. Like, that is what you're
yeah.
doing all day long. So that's amazing. Vivek, I know that mentorship is important to you. So
Mhm,
what are your
mhm.
thoughts on mentorship and how do you approach that?
Um, so I have been blessed throughout my career to have amazing people willing to mentor me, and yeah, I still benefit from that. A lot of consulting partners when I was at the university. I could directly get in touch with them who have like 10 years of experience in consulting, and who could just answer almost every question that I had, and provide really concrete guidance from their experience. And so yeah, I do that a lot. Reach out to people, use university networks, use alumni networks, and so on, and benefit a lot from just experiences of people. And I try to give that back to the society as well. So I have been mentoring a lot of engineers and a lot of B school grads into getting into consulting. Just especially now B school grads, especially as the transition from engineering to B school, as well as startups. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's something that I encourage people to just reach out to people whom they think that they can help. There are ample amounts of platforms nowadays as well, where you can, platforms that you can leverage to seek some mentorship. If, let's say, your uni or the companies you have worked in do not have a structured mentoring program. Um,
Yes. And what are you excited about now? Or is it kind of in the tech space, in the startup space strategy? What excites you now?
Um, I mean, so far, chief of staff work has been fascinating. So that does excite me, just the work in itself. I get to do things that I like, and that's motivating. Impact has been the core of everything that I have done so far. Um, I love when something that I have built is actually used and creates value. There is no better feeling than this. No better satisfaction in terms of work. So that's amazing, and that's driving me well so far. But let's say down the line, few years, I'd like to build something big on my own. So maybe found something and create some product myself, and that as well, working directly with founders. I'm also doing freelance consulting slash interim chief of staff, advising a lot of small companies and startups here in Germany. So that is a bit of freelance work, side gigs that I'm doing, and both the main tasks, side gigs, everything is kind of quite aligned to where I want to reach in few years. So yes, excited about what I'm doing now, and excited about where it leads me, how all this contributes to what I want to build at the end.
That's a great place to be when you're excited about what you're doing now and then where that's going to lead you. So, with that, if anyone has listened to you and says, "Oh, I actually would love to, have a brainstorm session or just bounce some ideas around with Vivek," where is the best place for people to find you or connect with you?
LinkedIn, to reach out there. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so yes, that would be the place to reach out.
Excellent. We'll have your LinkedIn information in the show notes for people. But Vivek, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wonderful insights and theoretical and practical tips on building trust and moving from consulting to chief of staff. Thank you so much.
Emily, it was an absolute pleasure being here. Thanks for inviting me. It was lovely talking to you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.